because we thought that you would be the best place to start this morning. Essentially, what we're going to do is put the bill up on the screen and go through any changes that were made from the last version. And also, I guess if at that point, if Chris wants to comment on, well, if you can go through the changes and if you could try and highlight points that were made where we didn't make changes, you didn't see a need to make changes, that would be helpful. And Chris, having been here yesterday, can join in. And then we would be grounded up to the present moment, and then we'll hear from our other witnesses.
Sure. So Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. I am here on 21-090. So I did add some changes to the draft, but I didn't receive any direction on those changes. So I kind of made some educated guesses.
I apologize, but for the most part, I trust those changes. So let's throw them out and see how they fare.
Okay. That's that it. I'm a little sleepy this morning since I had many bills to draft. Can you see the bill?
Yes.
I am having an issue.
And Ellen, it's on our website, so we can all pull it up on our own devices. Is that okay? I mean, so we can follow you through it. It's right here on our website.
Working for you. I can't seem to see it at the moment, so I don't know.
Oh, so you can't see it at all.
Yeah, I can't see it, but
it's not on our, oh, here it comes. There it is. And it's draft 10.1 we want to look at, right?
It is 10.1. Okay. Can you see it? Because I'm having I have a weird screen. It's 10.1. It's dated 2/24, 8:30 p.m. And so the first change, is on page 4 in the eligibility for a municipality to use the grant program, starting under the section F. So to receive the grant, the municipality shall identify water and sewer infrastructure, constrained water and sewer service areas, and constraints on that infrastructure. You did receive testimony yesterday that perhaps these phrases should be defined. I didn't have a definition, but I thought I thought this sentence originally was a little bit of a run-on sentence. So I tried to make it a little more clear that based on last year's bill, at least, there was in S237 last year, there was discussion about making sure there was mapping of the water and sewer infrastructure. But this isn't dictating that specifically. It's a little more flexible, but also in a nod to knowing where there are constraints on the existing systems is important.
This language is better. It's clearer. I agree with you that it was sort of a run-on sentence before, and it does address some of the concerns people had with exact, I guess, perhaps expensive mapping, which I don't think this gets most of the information that I think the advocates and these ACCD were looking for in their bill from last year. Okay, so let's go on.
So then still under the municipal grant program, you heard testimony that it would be useful for there to be a deadline for the department to adopt guidelines by. So I inserted on or before September 1, the department shall adopt guidelines. I don't know how that date works, but it was sort of a guess.
Right. Well, we can hear from Chris, but if you figure the bill may get signed at the end of April, that would give May, June, July, 4 months. I assume people want to get this up and running sooner rather than later. So I'm not sure this is all that detailed of a project, but we can hear from Chris as to whether that's a manageable or aggressive enough date. Let's go on.
Sure. And then you also heard a suggestion that both of the appropriations in this bill have a reversion date in case the funds aren't used. So in section 3, the appropriation for the municipal bylaw grant program, the municipal modernization grants, I added the sentence, any funds not allocated as grants under the section by July 1, 2026 shall be returned to the general fund.
Okay, I was envisioning this as being carry forward funds, which you accomplish here by putting that date out there, but I think that's going to raise some eyebrows being out that far. So why don't we change that to 2023? I'm pretty sure this is not a lot of money. I think in 2 years, there'll be enough applications to spend this money.
Okay.
We can hear from Chris on that as well.
And then I just picked the same date for the training and assistance. So the $100,000 to the department for training and assistance in navigating the permitting process. Any funds not used by 2026 shall be returned. But
okay, we should change that to the same,
okay.
to 23. Chris or Ellen, do you remember the language? We had language and money in for these purposes last year. I know this must be quite similar, but does it jump out at you what the differences might be in section 4 from what we had? I know we had it may have been lumped in with other funding. We threw in the accessory dwelling stuff.
Yeah, I can check. I recall it was small scale developers and perhaps ADUs was called out specifically, I think. But this gets to the same point. And we know your intent. So, but I'm agnostic if you want to revert to the other language or have us look it up.
Well, I just, the missing middle housing, you live in that world and people know what that means. It's not real a legislative term, I don't think. And I like the fact of small scale development because it cries out more for need that they can't do this on their own. So if we put small scale development instead of middle missing housing, would you still be agnostic?
Yeah, no, I'm fine. Or small scale builders, I think maybe a better word. I think sometimes people think developers are bad. So just
small scale developments, small scale units, small scale housing.
Yeah.
How about that? Small scale and infill housing.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, so last year's appropriation was for $50,000 and I believe it only referenced accessory dwelling units.
Okay. Well, let's go with, at this point, let's change middle missing housing to just say small scale and infill housing.
Okay. Okay, so the only other,
sorry,
Yep.
can I just go back to a concern that has been raised about making sure that we include affordability more fully in some of this? Is that do you want to wait till we finish going through this draft, Mr. Chair, to discuss that?
I know Jen Holler is going to raise precisely that point, and we
Okay.
can talk about it in a little more detail, okay?
Okay, so after Ellen goes through?
Yep.
Okay, great. I just want to put it on the table.
It's on, yep.
So the only other change I made is at the end in the wastewater permit system language. There was a question about if last year ANR recommended striking the reference to single connections only. And I went through the testimony from your committee last year and Senate Natural Resources, and I didn't see that in any of the testimony. I don't know if it was discussed. I don't remember. But there were actually a number of changes otherwise proposed that did not get incorporated. And I thought at least one of them made sense. So I rewrote subsection 4 in the requirements just to be a little more clear. So this is under what a municipality must do. So in order to be allowed to issue the permits without a need for a state permit. So for authorizations from the municipality comply with the technical standards for sanitary sewer service lines and water service lines in the wastewater and potable water supply rules. There wasn't the prior language did not actually reference the rules. It just referenced the technical standards. So it may be appropriate to be a little more clear about the actual rules on this type of infrastructure. And I think that's it.
Before we leave this, Chris or Kate, do you have any comment on, this was raised by Karen Horn yesterday. I admit I'm not totally following it. Was she mistaken, or does she have a legitimate concern? Does it need to be, what's the policy around the single line issue?
I candidly do not know either, but I did email Karen Horn this morning and asked her, said there's no record of this coming up in testimony, and if she could sit down with a couple municipal operators of systems and make sure that this language works. I haven't heard back. We talked extensively with ANR and municipal operators before, so I would be surprised if there's going to be any significant changes. The water and wastewater rules it's about a 100-page document, so I don't know what that obligates the municipalities to. So I would like her to give her the opportunity to look into this language change and make sure that that's going to work.
Okay, if you could take the lead on that and
Absolutely,
Karen, and get back to us. If you can get back to us today, that would be great. If we need to make any changes, bill may go to the printer today. So.
okay.
Okay.
This is not.
If it does, and we have to change it afterwards, that's no big deal.
Understood.
Do you have something, Kate, on that, or same?
Oh, thank you for asking my opinion. This is not an issue I'm familiar with, so I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Anything else?
On the other sections, I'm fine with the new.
Wait, let's just want to make sure we're finished with Ellen. Do you have any other changes, Ellen, or are we all?
No, that was the last of it.
Thank you very much. Getting close. Okay. So the order from here, I was going to say, Chris, because you were at the hearing yesterday, looking at these changes, did you think we missed any points, or even if there were points made that you disagreed with that you feel are appropriately not addressed, just to refresh our memory as to why we wouldn't consider those?
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add here. Some may want to see, I'm comfortable with the, requirement to stand up the program. We would do that anyways, but if that gives people some comfort to set a date, absolutely fine with that. The funding reverting to the general fund is fine with me. It kind of puts the pressure on us to make sure it's used. Some may want to see that, because there's such limited funding for planning, for it to revert to the, the general MPG fund. But I'll let others weigh in on that. And then I will follow up on the water and wastewater stuff and get you a reply as quick as I can. That's all I have. Thanks.
On the first issue, I don't want to tie your hands if there's some programs to go, but because it's a competitive program, it seems like people should know the sort of the guidelines or the rules they're applying under before you issue a grant. So I assume if we say September 21st, that means on or before September 21st. And, you know, if you see this coming down the pike, even before it's signed, you know, you can go and work on it and get things going. You can obviously start the application process.
And that would be our intent. We would want to get something ready, you know, early summer, and make sure that everybody's got a chance to weigh in, make sure we haven't missed anything.
Well, we know, Chris, you never sleep, so that's good. Okay.
I could say the same about you.
Yes. Okay. So now we're going to go over to Kate, and you can do a whole overview of the bill, what you like, what you don't like, and your understanding. It'd be good for us to hear from you. Kate had been involved in drafting of the bill with Chris, myself, and Ellen, and but she was not able to be here yesterday. So.
Very good. Thank you, Senator. Good morning. My name is Kate McCarthy. I'm the Sustainable Communities Program Director at the Vermont Natural Resources Council. And I do appreciate the chance to be involved in thinking through this bill and putting some language together. I also appreciate that we're having some further conversation about it. So within the sustainable communities realm, I promote affordable housing and housing choice, particularly in smart growth locations because of all of the other benefits that come along with that. So this is an important step in the right direction, this bill. VNRC supports this bill for a number of reasons. Housing need, I almost don't even need to say more. We all know that it's a complex problem that we're working together to solve, and regulations are only a piece of it, but they are a piece that we can invest in because it takes time to update regulations and because it takes time for communities to take shape. We need to lay the groundwork since development can happen at a pretty slow pace. We want to make sure that when it does happen, we get what we're wanting, and zoning bylaws help us with that. I think that this bill's support for small scale development is wise. You know, housing investment is really needed at all scales, and we need investors and developers of all types. But that smaller scale of development, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 units, is a sector that I think is worth cultivating more. It's also a style and a pace of development that I think really fits in our communities. Especially when we're reinvesting or redeveloping in neighborhoods that have been disinvested over the years. And I just do want to share that a couple of days ago, I was able to attend training on how to become a small scale developer. And it was run by something called the Incremental Development Alliance. This is a nonprofit that exists, the Incremental Development Alliance. And their whole philosophy is that if you find a place and you love it, you become well positioned to know what type of investment is going to serve that community, what pace of investment is going to make sense and be received, and how you can ultimately strengthen a place. It sort of reminds me of the concept I've heard of that you've probably heard of too, this idea of economic gardening, that we are cultivating places for the long term, and we're doing it in a way that really fits. So I think small scale development and developers, investors are well positioned to do this kind of, play this long game on community investment that is gonna make sturdier places. We also support the increase in tax credits. VNRC has been a supporter of the downtown historic preservation tax credits for a long time. And it's been a very important tool for smart growth and for historic preservation. So we support that increased amount. We also support expanding it to the neighborhood development areas in order to boost investment in housing in these areas that are close to our downtowns and villages. You know, if the amount of the tax credits were to remain level, I would have some hesitation about expanding it to the neighborhood development areas. But considering that you are looking at a significant and very welcome increase, I think that makes it appropriate to go a little broader with those tax credits. Okay. I do need to note that VNRC would oppose the bill if it included any Act 250 exemptions in downtowns. I see Chris smiling because this is a very consistent message that I deliver year to year. So we don't see standalone exemptions as appropriate. We've been weakening Act 250 for years without increasing protections in areas that are frankly more vulnerable to development. We really need a balanced approach. And with that in mind, I'll say a bit more about this later. I think it may be time, and some of you may be feeling the same way. I think it may be time to look more closely at the designations before going too far with exemptions, even in these smart growth locations. So those are the things that I support. There's a lot to support in this bill, and I think it's a very positive thing. I do have some suggestions.
Can I interrupt you for a second so I don't lose the train of thought?
Sure.
You said, the last thing you said about exemptions, could you repeat that?
Sure. When we have talked about exempting certain areas from regulations, especially Act 250, the conversation has focused on state designated areas like downtowns and growth centers and new town centers.
Right.
And I think that before we start using those designations were created as economic revitalization programs.
Right.
And so the boundaries and the rules that we follow to draw those boundaries are all about economic revitalization. They kind of overlap with some of the goals we'd want to achieve when it comes to land use. But if we want to start using these for permit exemptions or other land use oriented programs, we probably need to rethink the designations so that they're right.
Are we doing that in this bill at all?
We are not, but that was going to be one of my suggestions, is that you consider studying doing a review of those designation programs, some of which are over 20 years old.
Mr. Chair, may I add to that?
Yes.
Thanks. Kate, I think that is a great marker. In developing our student debt bill and our enhanced down payment assistance program bill, both bills you'll see shortly, and neighborhood development areas, we wouldn't, if we reviewed the designated areas, they're very tightly drawn, those designated areas. We wouldn't need another designated area like neighborhood development area if our designations were a little more flexible and a little larger. But we were all those original designations were very tightly drawn. So one of our challenges as we look at housing is sometimes these designations are just in the downtown that may not have as many opportunities for housing as we'd like. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you expanded them, and they haven't been reviewed for a long time, all we've done is add to them. So again, we create these patchworks of opportunity. And in fact, they all have a similar value and a similar expectation and objective. Mm-hmm. And I think it actually is right time to, and you overlay opportunity zones on top of this. So it's, to me, maybe a great time for us to review that. And Chris may be having a heart attack about this, but I think that it might actually be a great time for us to look at that because it's been a long time since we did.
So
thank you, Senator.
Let's continue this conversation now, because I think it's going to come up again from other witnesses too. Is my initial reaction is it's another lift on this bill, which is totally manageable now, and we could do it. The question I would have is it cost money? Could it be done without legislation? Could we write a letter to Chris? I mean, Chris spent an inordinate amount of time in coming up with S237, I think without any legislative mandate, and managed to pull together a report to the legislature, or at least a bill to the legislature. Can that just be done by us writing a letter right now? Do we need to, I mean, it costs money, it takes time. It also opens the door to questions. Where is this going? And, we really haven't spent a lot of time on this at this point. I'm open to having a discussion. The other possibility is that we can send the bill, let's get it launched. And when it comes back, we can explore maybe adding on to it at that point. So those are just my initial thoughts on the conversation. Chris, do you want to weigh in a little bit while we're on this?
No, absolutely. And, I agree with the sentiment. The designations were created at different times for different purposes. It makes me crazy when I have to explain we have 5 different designations and here's how they work. So I do think that it's appropriate to have the conversation about how do we modernize the programs, how do we integrate them, and how do we, look forward to, them taking on a larger regulatory role and what's appropriate. That said, for better, for worse, I think it's mostly better. We're getting a lot of support in the legislature for, huge expansions to all of our programs. I already have 2 frozen positions. So there needs to be some recognition that this does take work and it does take a lot of time. We have over, I think, 240 designated communities, lots of stakeholders, and there's a lot of complexity and nuance to this. And it would take us a lot of conversations to get it right. And we would want to do it right. So when it got to you, everybody was on the same page and you weren't dealing with a messy bill that everybody disagreed or had different ideas on. Having these conversations in a Zoom framework, I think there's light at the end of the tunnel, but it's just out of the question. So we would actually have to have, in-person meetings. So just recognize that, yes, I acknowledge it's this work that needs to happen. I don't need a legislative directive to do it. I want to do it. I just lack the capacity right now to take it on. And until we get through COVID, it's just not the right time to have the conversation.
So what about the idea of, one of the things I could do, I could talk to the chair of appropriations, and when we write our intent or our advice on the budget, we say at that point, we would like to have 2 positions or $200,000 for redesignation and see if that makes it into the budget, as opposed to, I can see pros and cons of putting it on this bill now or doing it later. It just seems like we've really drilled this down to this new, we don't want to call it a new program, but to new money for grants to promote affordable, dense housing. And now it feels a little different to expand the world to this major project. But I'm open to it. So,
Mr. Chair, can I ask a couple questions?
Senator Rahm.
So, and I just interjected because I didn't know if you could see my hand, but
No, it's
are
fine.
you, sorry.
Yeah, I can see people. Yep,
Okay.
Michael, can you see people or not?
I can.
Okay, good. Sorry.
So I can wait if you wanted to.
No. If it's
Oh,
about
okay.
this, if it's about this,
About them.
we needed to have this conversation. Yep, go ahead.
So I have 2 questions. One is a more general question about not having been here last year. Didn't Senate Natural Resources really modify the bill, and did that pass, or did the governor veto it? I can't remember what happened, because I thought
Senate Natural Resources modified the bill a little bit. It passed the Senate, I think, unanimously. There was a big brouhaha on germaneness and stuff around some of the Act 250 stuff. That didn't make it over to the House. And then the House diluted the bill somewhat or significantly down to that ADU and small lot stuff that we dealt with earlier in the session. So this is the vestige of 237 in a much more manageable form, especially because it doesn't have the Act 250 stuff in it.
Yeah, and we'll fill you in on the Act 250 discussion offline. We can fill you in on that.
Okay. Well, that helps answer my question. Full disclosure, as a former board member for VNRC, Kate, I just wanted to ask you, as VNRC works on trying on an environmental justice lens for its work and wanting to promote livable, walkable, healthy downtowns and, dense spaces, is that changing your positionality at all around Act 250 or anything that could help really promote walkable downtowns and other benefits to people who are otherwise usually marginalized from having access to a clean and healthy environment?
Thank you for that question, Senator. I think that it is changing how, I think that it is reinforcing the need to make sure that when let me put it this way, we still are very committed to smart growth investment. I think we have an added understanding and emphasis on ensuring that investments to those areas are made in ways not supporting just smart growth, but supporting smart growth in a way that includes more people. Because you can invest like crazy in a beautiful village or a beautiful downtown and manage to exclude many people in the process. That has happened with transit-oriented development in bigger cities where people reliant on transit have seen the neighborhoods around transit grow up and become so desirable that they're priced out. You need to be able to plan in advance in order to avoid those consequences, unintended or intended, as they may be. Does it change, you asked, does it change our approach to Act 250? I feel that Act 250 is one of many, many ways that we can promote smart growth. So I don't see work on Act 250 as, well, I don't believe in silver bullets, but I don't see it as the silver bullet to promoting smart growth. So I would not say that we're focusing all of our energy on environmental justice and inclusion and equity in the smart growth in Act 250 to promote smart growth. I would say more that I am working and hoping and practicing and improving, infusing it into the many different types of investments that we talk about making.
So I
Well-
guess, I'm sorry, Keisha, go ahead.
Well, I mean, you know, one thing that I wanted to pick up on is you talked about sort of critical areas for open space and places that we shouldn't develop in, you know, and I wondered too, I mean, it's so important also to get more detailed with mapping and say, hey, are we protecting critical areas that allow more open space access for people in mobile home communities or who, you know, otherwise don't have a lot of access to green space? So I didn't know if you're starting to look at areas that you want to designate as critical to protect that benefit more people than we might have.
Yeah, Keisha, that was part of our Act 250 balancing that failed. As another former
Okay.
member of VNRC, I way preceded you on the VNRC board, but it was very important to many of us that we balance anything we did in our downtowns with protecting our backcountry space. That is where this all fell apart, and I think we're all hoping for sort of a unified Act 250 bill that includes any changes we make in Act 250 in a thoughtful, comprehensive way. And
So
so
this includes what Natural Resources did at the end of last year before
we
it
hope
died.
it was what they did was great. I mean, so anyway, yeah, I would hope, but that's a separate conversation now. We're really focusing on the bylaw changes, the zoning changes, what we can do within the regulatory structure we already have to
So
promote.
my I guess my decision or feeling on this designation study or modernization of the designation programs is in this bill is somewhat dependent on the experts' answers is how acutely does that relate to housing? If it's mostly for economic development and other things, but if Alex and Chris and Kate say housing is totally integrated to those designations, then maybe we should just throw it on there, put a couple $100,000 in and see where it goes. It could be a one sentence thing. It's sort of,
Yeah,
this is a little bit of an omnibus bill. So how does it relate to housing, these designations in your mind?
Today, they are economic core designations, and that's why they are so tightly drawn, as Senator Clarkson noted. We don't have strong economic cores unless we have vitality and we have customers and we have feet on the street and we have people in these places and loving these places around the clock. So I see housing as directly related to promoting the economic vitality of these places. I also see that the designation, it's really two sides of the same coin. I see that the designations have a role to play in promoting more housing that is included in these areas with appropriate planning and siting and design. So I don't see that the designations are, like I said, not the silver bullet for housing today, but they could lead to a type of planning that allows for more housing in smart growth locations tomorrow. And so I think that's a great opportunity. As we're talking about this, I don't see this as a September 1st, 2021 report that you can see on your desks. I see this as a couple-year process in order to be done very carefully, very thoughtfully. When the growth centers were established, when the downtown programs were established, those were the result of a lot of research, a lot of look at best practices. So there may be an eagerness to reform the designations and for those who are motivated by maybe permitting exemptions, but they really need to be updated in a way that leads to best practices in planning as well. So I don't think this is a rush. All the more reason to start now.
We already have priority housing in designated downtowns.
We do.
Do we have it in neighborhood development areas? I don't know.
Yeah,
But so there's a connection already for the
Mhm.
designation to promoting housing. Would there be other witnesses would there be some people who just think the designation laws right now are just fine and they're afraid that you change them and modernize them, it may gore them in a way? Do we have to start opening this to other witnesses?
I think it would be smart to include the Affordable Housing Coalition because there are some benefits that accrue to affordable housing developers right now. You may want to talk to Housing Vermont, which is now called Evernorth, about this. But I think anyone who wants to do more housing is probably interested in thinking forward about shaping these in a way that streamlines that effort.
Okay, I know we're going to hear from Jen, who is promoting more elements of affordable housing within other elements of this bill, so we can all tie this together and make a decision on this. Okay.
And I think as you think about this, Chris,
before we move on to Alex, Chris, yes.
Michael, Chris has a comment, and I would say local planners also might want to weigh in, but Chris has his hand up.
Yeah, just quick, the proposed expansion of the tax credit benefit to neighborhood development areas significantly, over time will enlarge, to your point, Senator Clarkson, kind of the benefit area to capture a lot of these housing. So there is, the proposal before us does put the designation program kind of more squarely in the housing policy arena.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move to
Kate.
Somebody else. Sorry.
I have one more point, if I may.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you for that nice segue into my suggestions to strengthen the bill. And now I've heard your appetite for doing that. Thank you for talking about the designations. If you want to think even beyond that, and I want to respect the need to keep the bill lean and the time that you do or don't have, but I will just give you one more thing to think about, which is the bylaw incentives that you're putting forth here are going to help communities that are ready to update their bylaws. But for some places, that can be a pretty long process because it's about getting a shared vision. It's about helping people understand what it means to change the words in the bylaw and how that translates into what's happening in their neighborhood. It's a process. And when it comes to housing, people can be sensitive. So, and also it's just hard. It's not just people being sensitive. I should be clear. So I might suggest that some of the funds be set aside for what I would call bylaw readiness projects. Some of that, those projects that would help communities that aren't quite ready to take the leap updating. And so that might be housing needs assessments, that might fund facilitated community conversations, outreach, hands-on workshops, and other public participation. And that would help people kind of move along the spectrum of readiness for changing their bylaws. It takes a long time to get community buy-in and understanding, especially for something as kind of esoteric to the average, to most people, as a zoning bylaw. And I know that the existing municipal planning grants could probably be used for some of this, but those have been underfunded for so long, and they're so relied upon for other types of basic planning that there really needs to be money dedicated to these things if we want to see them happen. So that would be my second point for you to consider if you want to think of a way for this bill to support even more communities.
One way of doing it might be a 10% set aside for very small communities that are just beginning the process and allow the money to be used there without having to meet these criteria in a final product.
That's right.
Okay.
I think the overall solution is to fully fund the municipal planning grants back to their levels of 20 years ago, but that's probably beyond the scope of this bill and today's conversation. But I know you are aware of that as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else have comments before we go to Alex? Welcome, Alex. How are you?
I'm well, Senator. Thanks for having me. So before I start, do you actually want to hear from Jen first? I know Jen was here yesterday and didn't get a chance to speak, and I'm interested in what she has to say.
No, actually, I'd rather just leave Jen for cleanup. So if you want to just go ahead.
Okay, I'll be
I
brief.
know what Jen's going to say.
Yeah, okay. I'll be brief then. My name's Alex Weinhagen. I'm the chair of the Vermont Planners Association Legislative Committee and vice president of VPA. I served as the legislative liaison for the last 4 years. We're currently seeking someone else to fill that role, but it's vacant at the moment. So several of us are stepping up to try to provide advice and track what's happening in the legislature this year. I also work, my day job is actually for the town of Heinsberg. I'm the director of planning and zoning, and I've been there for about 18 years. So I can't speak on behalf of VPA because this bill just emerged and we haven't had a chance to actually review it through our normal protocols through our legislative committee. But I can give you some feedback based on what we said last year on S237 and also just what I see as a municipal planning practitioner. So again, very briefly, the bill has 4 major elements. They all look very good to me. And I think that the increase in the funding for the municipal and regional planning fund with the specific sort of authorization for this new bylaw modernization program is great. Rarely do we actually see new money come our way. It often is just mandates for address this in your plan, take up this in your plan, and this is different. These are real funds that can help us at the municipal level. So that first section of the bill is great. The increase in the tax credit program also a really good idea. And I second Kate's point that to expand it to neighborhood designation areas needs more funding, and you've done that. So the bill's great on that front. The training for small developers or small housing sort of projects, that's an interesting concept. I'll be interested to see how that rolls out. And I'm in a small community, so I deal with small scale development quite a lot. And it would be interesting to have more developers sort of at the ready and understanding what's needed with that missing middle. And then, this portion about the water, wastewater permitting, many of us have been advocating for that for years. That makes total sense. And I would only encourage you to either perhaps later when it hits the House side, make sure that the folks who are in operators, as Chris mentioned, in the water and wastewater fields at the municipal level have a chance to weigh in on it. And I'm not sure Karen Horn is going to be able to tidy that all up in a few hours. So just assume that more could be said about that from the folks who actually manage those systems, as the bill evolves through the process. With regard to some suggestions for some revisions, I would echo Kate's comment that planning is a process and bylaw adoption is also a process, and that bylaws have to be consistent with the municipal comprehensive plans that guide them. And so some communities will want to do this work, but will actually need to update their plans in the process. And as Kate said, the municipal planning grant program, the traditional one, is there to help fund those efforts. But just for you to understand that that there's a little bit more to what happens than just a quick change to a bylaw. There are capital budgets and plans that might want to be looked at. There's the overall municipal plan and the like. With regard to section 2 of the bill, the this is the section that talks about the bylaw modernization program and what it should be used for. Section E, the top of page 4 on draft 10.1 has some language that I would revise if you were willing. So it starts off with, to be eligible for the funds, a municipality shall, and then it goes on after that to talk about what the municipality shall do. I would soften that language a bit to say that what the funds are intended for, rather than what the end result must be. So remember that bylaw adoption in many rural communities requires a vote from the community. In more urban communities, in our Vermont terminology, select boards can make those decisions. So I think that if the language was simply revised to say that these funds are intended to assist municipalities with the adoption of bylaws that support pedestrian-oriented and neighborhood development patterns consistent with smart growth principles, that language would be better than what is in that first sentence now. Similarly, in the second sentence, if that were changed to say something of the sort of such bylaws shall increase housing choice and opportunity in smart growth areas, so that the intention is clear, and the follow through is then part of the project. And it's hard for us as municipal planners to guarantee the outcomes and guarantee the results, but we can certainly guarantee the effort and the stated intent of the funding and what it's meant to be used for. I'm a little curious about whether this is intended.
Well, can I just interrupt? I mean, you raise a valid point. If the wording was shall be used for, that would allow promotion of use of that money for that purpose, but you wouldn't necessarily have to show a guarantee for an end product in case it blew up or something, as long as you were trying. Is that what you're saying?
That's part of what I'm saying, and that might do the trick. I'm happy to provide you some written suggestions on it. I think that because this will be a grant program and administered by DHCD, there will be lots of checks and requirements for what municipalities will have to use the funds for. So yes, I don't think that we need to, in the legislative language, require that certain bylaws be adopted, as opposed to require that municipalities use the funds to work on projects that meet the legislative intent. So yeah, many ways to potentially do some minor rewording there. My other question is this intended to be just for communities that have municipal water and sewer systems? Because the way it's worded sort of smacks of that. And if that's the case, you should talk about whether that's appropriate, because there are many rural communities across the state that do not have municipal water and sewer service, but are still doing great work on within designation areas and to support infill and housing. I can think of the community that I started my career in, Westford in Chittenden County, is doing great work on that front without having a municipal water and sewer system. Jericho is also doing good work on that front.
That's a perfect segue into another bill we're working on. Project-based tips.
I don't think that was the intent, but I could ask the other players here.
Well, I would just suggest that if it's not the intent, modify the language in this same section under letter F, that section that Ellen made some changes to based on Karen Horn's comments, perhaps change that language one more time to say that to receive the grant, municipalities shall assess water and wastewater disposal capacity and not tie it to water and sewer infrastructure. I know those are just maybe semantics, but water and sewer infrastructure to most of us means municipal pipes and systems. And there may be on-site treatment solutions that don't involve those in the same way that we typically think of.
Alex, could you, instead of discussing these points, which are totally colorable claims. Could you shoot an email out to myself and Ellen and Kate and Chris and Becca with the changes and the reasons you'd want to see, and maybe get a conversation going today so we could vote this out probably tomorrow?
Sure, absolutely. And just having time to review the bill early this morning, I just didn't have time to do that ahead of time. But yeah, happy to do that, and also happy to see some of these things get woven in once the bill, hits the House. I know that it'll be well received on that side, and tune up as always possible. A couple of final points. The fund reversion conversation that was had just a little bit ago. I would support what Chris Cochran said, that it would be great if these funds, to the extent they don't get spent, I think they will be, revert back to the municipal and regional planning fund and not the general fund, for the reasons Kate mentioned. That fund has been underfunded for so long. Clinging to whatever is possible is important to those of us that need those funds. And finally, on the designation conversation, I don't think it belongs in this bill. I respect what Kate's suggestion is and think she's right about the need to do that work. But I think that, that's an easy recommendation, as you mentioned, Senator Sirotkin, to make to the administration through Chris. And Chris's appetite and willingness to do that is clear, from what he said. So, I think this bill should just proceed in a tighter fashion, the way it's been drafted, with just a couple of tweaks.
And the problem with that last comment is money. I mean,
Yeah, I was going to say, Alex, that's nice, but without the money, it's not happening. You heard him preface it all by saying he's under-resourced.
Right, but I'm not sure that this bill is the place to find the money for that. And furthermore, the COVID situation is such that, and Chris can speak to this better than I can, my understanding is his department is got a focus right now, and revising the designation areas is not the focus right now. It's getting through COVID and making sure that those economic development funds get out the door. But I'll leave that to Chris.
Okay.
Well, and
Senator Clarkson? Nothing?
Nothing. I was going to say.
Senator Rahm?
So I was always under the impression that a lot of those smaller is my internet, or can everyone hear me?
You're fine. We can hear you.
Okay. That a lot of those smaller downtowns and village centers were trying to work toward greater municipal water and sewer infrastructure so that they could grow. So I'm just curious if we're trying to still encourage them to build that infrastructure, or you're saying they have other solutions and we shouldn't feel the need to push them toward more water and sewer hookups to add more vibrancy to their village center.
I'm saying both, that yes, we want to encourage small communities to have the advantages that come with municipal water and sewer systems if they can figure out a way to make them work. But in this particular bill, I don't think we want to restrict the ability of communities to update their bylaws based on whether they have a water and sewer system already. There are communities that don't, that may want to update their bylaws and work towards more housing, and we should encourage that.
That's fair.
So just one quick closure on that, Chris. That wasn't the intent, as you saw it, to foreclose communities without water and sewer to not be able to apply for this money, right?
No, I think it was a decision largely based on kind of the conversations we had last year in S237. There is to me, a nexus between wanting to promote growth in areas with capacity to grow that do have existing sewer and water systems, and a delegation if the state is going to remove, their state permit. You need to know where your water and sewer lines are if you're going to start making your sewer connections. So we wanted to be able to provide the support to the communities wanting to do that. I think it's just a decision that you need to make. There is a limited amount of funding. The more communities you make eligible, the more competition there is for the funds. Ultimately, we have to review and decide which applications are the best. So probably more competition is better.
Right. So I guess I'm still not clear. Does the bill as drafted prohibit a town without water and sewer for applying for these funds?
I don't think it does. It says one of the things that you need to look at is your existing infrastructure.
So if we put in your your existing infrastructure to the extent it exists,
It's just, yeah.
make it clear that that
Mhm.
is something you look at if you have it, but don't need to. I'm not hearing you whether, I mean, are you saying that that's a little dangerous to do because of the paucity of funds and it opens, I mean, it's sort of getting at the issue that Kate raises as well. You know, if we're going to start expanding the scope of the use of this money, we're possibly going to get less of a product to show back to the legislature on the few towns that come forward that want to modernize their bylaws, who are the poster childs and ready to go and stuff like that. So,
Right.
I mean, we may have to take a more narrow line on both the water and the newbies. It's something, something for the committee to discuss,
Mhm.
but
Mr.
I'm not
Mr.
hearing.
Chair.
Yeah.
There's kind of a two-edged sword on this one, because there are communities that use the lack of water and sewer as reasons to not do affordable housing, for example. And so in some ways, incenting them in other capacity, I mean, I can see pros and cons to this. I also understand we want to probably support, anyway, I think it's a nuanced conversation, quite frankly.
Okay. Let's move on to Jen, because we're a little bit late here. And thank you very much, Alex. Stick around. And Jen, if you could give us about 5 minutes, that would be great.
Okay, I'm tempted to go wildly off script and surprise all of you, but I won't.
Aw.
Oh, shock us.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm Jen Holler. I'm the Policy Director for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. Just because the topic is right on your minds related to Alex's most recent suggestions, I can appreciate where those come from. As you consider what to do about that, it might help to think about the distinction between the kind of grant program you're creating here and others. So often what the state will do is create a grant program to help build capacity or give funding to municipality or some other entity in order to do some activity that you would like them to explore. In this case, instead of requiring municipalities to make these changes in their bylaws, you're providing an incentive to them to do it. So basically you're saying, if you do this, then we will give you this incentive payment. So in that instance, I think the shall is appropriate. VHCB supports the bill. We're pleased that your committee is carving out time when you're having to do so much to address immediate needs related to unemployment insurance and helping small businesses and those kinds of things, that you're taking the time to think about something that's really the benefits of which are going to play out over decades. The bill as proposed is very much aligned with VHCB's mission, not only around housing, but also in terms of keeping our landscape open and working, but then also around climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions and extra travel and encouraging better design, all of those things. It hits all kinds of priorities, I think, for all of us. We know that zoning barriers can add to cost. That's something we're always very mindful of. It can delay projects. They can reduce the number of units and projects that do get approved. And in some instances, it can prevent making better use of water and sewer infrastructure that already exists. And I think the bill gets at all of those things. The state of Massachusetts did something similar like this 15 or so years ago, where they provided created a incentive program called the the Smart Growth Zoning and Production Act. It encourages municipalities to update their bylaws in ways that met certain criteria set out in statute, and would provide them incentive payments to do that. But one of the things that they included there was the requirement that affordable housing be considered. So I'm imagining if this is all wildly successful and more development happens in these areas where we really want it to happen, while we drive state resources and try to encourage development on those areas, we want to be sure we don't have the unintended consequence of driving out people of fewer means and really limiting choice for folks. So I want to kind of flag that. I know that the bill says that it's about choice and opportunity. Affordability is in there somewhere, but there's so many ways that historically either intended or unintended zoning and bylaws have had the effect of limiting choice and limiting affordability and access to the hearts of our communities for folks that I think it's really important to make that more explicit. So one of my recommendations would be to wherever it says in the bill, it's about housing choice and opportunity, that the word affordability be added. And I've sent Nathan some suggestions in writing. So I would ask that you might consider that. And then even more explicitly in F, where it says what a municipality shall do in order to receive a grant, I would propose, or VHCB would propose, that there be a number 6 added. And typically what I would love to be able to do is to bounce language around between the department and VNRC and VAPTA and others and really get it refined and make sure it works really well for everybody and everything's considered. There was not time to do that, so I would offer 2 possibilities to the committee, and it may need more work later on in the process. And one would be that in these bylaws updates, they would need to provide that 20% of new housing units would be affordable, and then it's linked to a definition that's in Title 24. 20% is what the Massachusetts did when they said, when they created this program. Alternatively, another possibility would be to say that the municipality must demonstrate how the updated bylaws will implement the housing element of their municipal plan if that plan has been approved at the regional level. So I've offered some language around those and provided it to Ellen and Nathan, and it should be posted, I would think, at some point. So you probably don't have time to go through that now, but I would just ask that you consider all those things. When we've heard about what other states have done around creating smart growth and using designation programs and directing resources, whether it's tax credit or other funding sources, to smart growth areas, sometimes you'll hear them say that the lesson learned and the mistake we made was assuming affordable housing was going to be there. And then once it's pushed out, the cost of rectifying that is astronomical. And so I just ask the committee to consider that and think about weaving that into the bill before you pass it along.
Just one question, and then we're going to move on. The last suggestion you made about being consistent with the housing element of a town plan, is there requirements already that housing elements have an affordability component in the housing element?
There's a requirement that it have a housing element, and that housing element addresses lower and moderate income housing needs.
Okay. So in some ways, we'll consider all these suggested add-ons, but in some ways, I think we sort of we preliminarily looked at this issue and I don't know if you're aware of there had been a requirement in the bill that the town set aside $10,000 for establishing a local housing trust fund in order to get this money, which would deal with affordability. And we just said that's just going a little further than we want to. Anyhow, so I would encourage Kate and Chris to run with this during the course of the day. Talk to whoever you need to talk to. Make sure you keep Ellen apprised of thoughts you have, and me and Becca as well. And we'll come back to this hopefully with a bill to either a committee bill or an individual bill to vote on. I'd like to possibly do that tomorrow. We may run into printing problems, but we'll do what we can. I think we're very close, and I think we've got a good piece of legislation here. Thank you. Let's take a 5-minute break till 9:55. Thank you.
Nathan, will you just get me the record of action sheets before tomorrow morning?